Good morning, and thank you for the introduction, and thank you for including me in today's session. We have just heard three brilliant and very sobering discussions. When I was invited to speak about the aftermath of the global financial crisis and the severe recession which followed, I didn't realize that I was going to be the comic relief. And they call economics the dismal science. There is much to talk about, and what I would like to do is to touch upon some of the themes that other speakers have mentioned, but also to drill down deeper and to talk about the economic challenges faced in the United States, in Israel, and throughout the globe, and to talk about the solutions, because as Professor Yadlin indicated, there are challenges, but when we are fortunate and we work hard, these sometimes represent opportunities as well. Let me begin with a brief comment about the current U.S. economy. There are grave concerns around the world, including in Israel, which is so dependent upon its trade with the United States, that the U.S. is about to enter yet another recession. I don't think so. Our economy has slowed for a variety of reasons. Most of these, we hope, are short-term in nature. There has been a dramatic impact, for example, because of the tragedy in Japan, which has severely disrupted the supply into many U.S. industries. There has also been the impact throughout the world of higher energy prices, which have served as a tax on economic growth. But those energy prices are now lower than they were just a few weeks ago. The more important question than these short-term impediments and obstacles to growth are some of the longer-term issues. And these issues affect not just the United States internally, but also globally. And so, for example, Professor Ferguson mentioned this shift from the West to the East. He was discussing it in many broad terms. Let me focus in on the economies. The United States is the world's single largest economy. It has been for many years, and it remains the world's single largest economy. But we are seeing a shift in balance. And so, for example, over the last 10 years, the incremental contribution of the United States to the global economy, measured in terms of GDP or industrial production, has been roughly matched by the net contribution by the Chinese economy as well. Where we are seeing a reduction in influence is in a number of the other industrial economies, specifically Europe. Europe is growing at less than 1/2 the pace of the United States. Over some periods of time, it has been growing at 1/3 the pace. And so the European economy, which started 10 years ago as being roughly the same size as the United States, is now smaller. The Japanese economy, which used to be the world's second largest single economy, has slipped dramatically as well. And so we take a look at this change in balance in the global economy, and we say it is a function, yes, of good growth coming from East Asia, coming from India, coming from other places, but what is also happening internally within some of the other economies. One of the important dynamic changes internally in the United States is the recognition that this is happening. Unlike other large economies over history that have stood by and watched, We have seen that within the United States, particularly among our large, well-run companies, a redirection of some of their energy. For example, instead of putting new investment to work in slower growing areas such as Europe, there has been a dramatic re-emphasis on faster growing economies. We see investments being made not just in East Asia, but also here in Israel. And U.S. companies report that the returns they achieve on these new investments by building new research facilities, new operations, and hiring workers in these other places, these returns are just as good as those being achieved in the United States. And so as the global economy is rebalancing, so too is the U.S. economy, and so too is the Israeli economy, which is undergoing its own transformation, shifting from older industries to newer industries, and shifting from old forms of export to new forms of export. And what the United States and Israel have very much in common is a focus on what we economists refer to as high value added. We're not focusing on low-priced, indeterminate products. We're focusing on those items which are truly distinguished because they have the best technology or they have the best innovation, and they cannot be achieved or received from someplace else because those other locations are not capable of producing these high value added goods and services. But there are indeed long-term challenges being faced in the United States and also in Israel. And I would suggest that the biggest challenge for tomorrow and the tomorrow beyond that has to do with our workers and our education. When there is a focus on high-quality goods and an intellectually based economy, there has to be a well-educated workforce. The United States remains one of the best educated nations on the planet. We have high literacy rates. We have high numeracy rates, that means good capabilities in mathematics and so on. But the gap that we have always enjoyed is now shrinking. We see that other nations have also decided that to maintain their competitiveness in the world, they too must focus on education. And so the United States is seeing that its gap of leadership is getting smaller. Ever since the data have been available, going back to the beginning of the 20th century, the United States has always had more college and university graduates than any other nation. We still do. We have also been ranked as #1 in terms of the percentage of our adult population that has a college degree. But we no longer are #1 in that category. We are now number 12. Other nations have taken it upon themselves to devote significant national effort in education, and this represents a huge challenge to the United States. I'd like to drill down a little bit deeper. Although a young adult today in the United States is no more likely to have a college degree than he or she was 10 years ago, young women are more likely to have a college degree, and young men are less likely. Over the last 10 years, as many young men were attracted to the illusory career opportunities of working in the construction industry or the manufacturing industry, where the hourly salary rate seemed to be attractive, they decided not to continue with their education. And in the recession which we suffered through in the United States, the unemployment rate for men was dramatically higher than it was for women. And by the way, it still is. This is something that we need to focus in on as a nation. Our unemployment rate has a cyclical component, which is related to the recession, and a structural component. What do I mean by structural? As economies shift, as they become more knowledge-based, as they become more export-oriented, the jobs that existed 5 years ago or 10 years ago may not be the jobs 5 or 10 years from now. And without suitable education, be it university-related or perhaps vocational training, then the workers who are displaced may not be able to fill those jobs. This is a significant challenge, but also a very dramatic opportunity. When we talk about innovation economies, we talk about workforces, but we also talk about the need for have suitable investment in the basics, basic science, research, and development. The United States has long been a leadership nation. We spend more money in this category than any other nation on the planet. But as a percentage of our GDP, our overall economy, it has slipped. It used to be 5 or 6%, and it's now somewhat below 3% of our GDP. By the way, here in Israel, it is higher at about 4.7%. And so when we try to prepare an economy for the future, we have to prepare our workers, and we have to give them the tools in the form of basic science, research, and the encouragement for businesses to expand in these areas and to have an opportunity to sell their goods and services in a competitive way around the world. Now, we have one other major challenge in the United States that I'll have a few moments to talk about. There are obviously many challenges, but the benefit of having only 15 minutes is I can't tell you all of them. The challenge I do want to discuss is that of our large budget deficits. For too many years in the United States, we have been borrowing from tomorrow by spending money yesterday and today, and we are now running out of time to make that budget balance. If you look at the data and are familiar with it, you will know that our budget deficit is currently about 10% of GDP, one of the highest we have seen in a peacetime period, but we believe it is a direct reflection of the aftermath of the recession. Over the next 2 years, most economists, including the nonpartisan economists who do work for the U.S. Congress, believe that our budget deficit will decline sharply as a percentage of GDP, going down to about 4%. During the Reagan administration, it was 6% of GDP. And during the Bush administration, it was 5% of GDP. We are moving in the right direction short term. Our true challenge, though, is the long-term budget deficit. And it is related to a demographic problem, the baby boom. For those of you not familiar with it, the largest single cohort, the largest single group of Americans were those that were born between 1947 and 1964. The peak year of our baby boom was 1957, and so I'm going to oversimplify. 1957 plus age 65 for retirement, 2022. That is the year of our long-term budget problem. Obviously, it could start a little bit sooner and last longer, But what happens when the baby boom generation is in its retirement years is, first, they will not be earning as much and not paying as much in taxes, and at the same time, they will be entitled to government benefits, including pension, which we call Social Security, and post-retiree health care called Medicare. The mathematics are clear. The mathematics say the combination of the aging population and the rise in healthcare expenditures creates a significant problem for us. It is a challenge, but again, one that could represent something where a solution is feasible. Right now, the political dynamic in the United States is making it quite difficult. Social Security is relatively easy to solve. A few technical adjustments and our pension system will be actuarially sound for 40 years. Our problem really is in the healthcare arena more than any other. So let me summarize for you very quickly. The most important thing for us in the economic area and in the financial market category is to be honest in our discussion and honest in the arithmetic, and to recognize that some problems are more easily solved than others, and some can be more easily solved quickly than others. The two long-term concerns, budget, but it is in the area of education that we think the greatest attention must occur. With an educated workforce, we can create more. It is the income, it is the productivity, it is the contribution of each worker that ultimately contributes to the success of a nation, that ultimately contributes to the wealth of a nation. And the challenges in Israel with regard to education are very similar to what we see in the United States. The good news I'd like to share with you is that it is being discussed honestly. To identify a problem is always the first step to a solution. Thank you very much.